Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today we welcome back PEXA on the podcast, must be about 2 years ago now, talking about their launch into the UK, their plans for remortgage, and at some point in the future, a sale and purchase proposition. Today we welcome Head of Market Development, Angela Hesketh, on because a lot of that stuff has been delivered. So remortgage is done, and we can touch on that a little bit, and you've now launched a sale and purchase proposition to the market as well. Thanks so much for joining the podcast, Angela. For the uninitiated, and I can't imagine there are that many of them out there, tell us about yourself and a little bit about PEXA as well, please.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me on. It's great to be here. Okay, so firstly I'm a conveyancer by trade. I was in private practice in the Northwest for over 30 years, dealing primarily with conveyancing and all of those other aspects that feed into conveyancing, like wills and probate and family and that kind of thing. Moved out into industry about 4 years ago with various different roles, but been with PEXA now for 2 years. So probably just before your last podcast.
I think it must be
where I fit in really there. So, and in relation to PEXA, what is it? It's a payment scheme, effectively, is what it is. So if we think about our chaps and faster payments today, the way that we move money, PEXA is a property specific way of moving money within the Bank of England, but it also links in directly, because it's property specific, with the validation of your title on the property, making sure that you can also register your title on completion, and we also automate that. So it deals with the workspace where the law firms and the lenders can come into the same space and ensure that the title is working, that the money is balancing between them. It then moves that money on completion, giving you the definitive time of when that's going to happen, and then it will lodge with Land Registry as well, so that you know that you've got a successful application with Land Registry, ultimately to get the title changed over following the movement of the funds.
I seem to remember that the podcast we did a couple of years ago was one of the highest listened to, probably remains to this day one of the highest listened to podcasts we've done. There's a lot of noise around PEXA and a lot of real interest, in part I suspect because of what's happened in Australia and the way that you've then come over and entered the UK market. Talk us through that journey that's taken you from Australia. I know that you weren't necessarily involved in that part of the business, but that journey that's taken you from Australia into the UK, starting with remortgage and now looking or having a sale and purchase proposition.
Yeah, okay. So firstly, in relation to Australia, in Australia, PEXA is active in around 92% of property transactions there. They're seen as critical infrastructure in relation to ensuring that the property market works. And they were created, or it was created, as a result of the wish to move towards electronic conveyancing. That's where it comes from. The reason why that would resonate and the UK would be attractive from that perspective is we have the same land registry system here as they do in Australia, and we have similar challenges in relation to how the risks around how money moves, how effectively that happens, the visibility around that, and also the security of the title as well. So that was the reason for the move. The move over here was in 2021, and at that point the main thing was what we haven't done is lifted and shifted the tech from Australia. So it was a matter of we've had those learnings, we've been able to provide a critical structure there. Let's look at what we can do in the UK market. So it was about creating a similar payment scheme, but UK specific here, and then looking to build the tech around that, the workspace, to ensure that it was specific to that UK requirements and market. So it's taken quite a bit of time in lots of ways, because I think we came and everyone expected there'd be a big bang and there'd be a lot of very vast change very quickly. But the main thing for us was to build the plumbing, if you like, to make sure that payment scheme was in place, to come into the market firstly within the remortgage area, because there's obviously less stakeholders involved in that. It's a more simplistic process, so we were able to test and learn through that. We've been able to do our first, we're now over 200 million pounds in transactions within the remortgage space. But during that time we've always been developing the tech anyway. The aim was always to come into the sale and purchase side. That was the ambition. So it was a matter of we build and continue to build, and that is really the basis of PEXA across the piece. They still do that in Australia. They continue to build on what they've got so that you can get those continual improvements in, whether that's the types of transactions, whether that's the usability, whatever it is. It's about how can we continually improve that going along. And the aim was then, within that, we also needed to look at how do we look at the different parts of the money in the transaction. So the main PEXA process is around the movement of lender funds and removing funds from reserve accounts from lenders and placing them to where they need to be, so they don't have to be taken out from the lender, placed somewhere else, for example the solicitor's account, and then put back into the banking system at some later date. So the main aspects of PEXA Pay is to be able to pull that money and push it somewhere else without the need to remove it. But in addition to that, when you move into sale and purchase, you've also got the challenge around consumer funds as well. So we then needed to go through a regulatory application with the FCA to ensure that we were able to also deal with consumer funds, so that again we can have all of the functionality that we need to get around the more complex transactions, and particularly in sale and purchase. That happened earlier this year. So that's why we went through our launch events in September to say, right, we've put all of that plumbing in place, we've put all of our authorization in place and regulation. We're now in a position to start bringing on board conveyancers, more lenders, and move towards a position where people can start to use that system. I suppose that's the thing, get used to it, see how it works, ask all the questions, work through all of those concerns and challenges people may have about what that means in relation to their own business and how they do conveyancing today and how that would look going forward, but do that on a certain number of transactions so we can build it from there. So that's where we are at the moment in relation to the journey and the sort of thoughts behind it, the planning, how we get into the sale and purchase world, really.
What I sense is that we're at a point in time where perhaps the regulatory framework has kind of enabled you to make this progress as well. I mean, you talk about PEXA Pay, for example. That is an initiative that's direct with the Bank of England, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And that's I find that quite interesting, because it's almost sort of reverse engineering the process. You've gone to the banks first rather than to the end user.
Yeah, I mean, it is, as I say, primarily a payment system and a payment line, if you like. And yes, the whole aim is to provide the ability to move money more effectively. So as I say, it's sort of the modern equivalent to a CHAPS or faster payments. Not that they will disappear in any way, but they are generic payment schemes. You know, that you use them to move money for whatever you want to buy and sell. The issue is that because within that you've got the property movement of money as well, there's no separation there that enables you to say, right, this is for this particular use case, this needs different functionality. It needs to be able to provide a different level of security, visibility, and connectivity, because ultimately what you want to be able to deliver is payment at the same time as moving a title. That's where we want to move to. We're in a situation at the moment, because of where land registry is, where we can get as close as we can to that, so we can deal with the payment and we can deal with the lodgement with land registry. But land registry aren't in a position at the moment to deal with instant registration, for example. So, but as digitisation moves and shifts, we're in that position where we're already delivering that, and it's just an extra layer when you look at things like the synchronization program, for example, that is talked about within the Bank of England, and how that could look. They're all iterations on what we have today of how do you move money and change the asset at the same time.
You've taken the words right out of my mouth. I mean, how critical is the digitisation of government, so HMLR, HMRC, for example, to PEXA's ability to integrate with it and ergo, and therefore their success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not critical. You know, we have the functionality now, we can offer that facility now, but every level of digitization will enhance the way that we're able to deal with property across the board, and PEXA is one of those things that will also add that extra layer. As I say, we can function and we do it. You know, we move the money, we'll deal with the registration of title, we deal with the validation of title, all of those things that can't be offered elsewhere, and with the current position with land registry as well. But if they become more digital, it just means that will become, whereas we can lodge it today, it becomes the registered title tomorrow, doesn't it? So, you know, you've still got that situation where once it's with the registry, it's with the registry for them to deal with the registration. What we can do and do is remove those avoidable requisitions in the meantime, so that so what we're effectively doing, and again, this is coming from the back forward probably, but by being able to eradicate a lot of those avoidable requisitions that we have today, that increases the pressure on land registry and leads to these backlogs, and then they're unable to deal with the more complex transactions for extended length of time. If you remove a lot of those avoidable requisitions, then what you do is free that time for them to enable the process of those more complex transactions more quickly as well. So it has a knock-on effect. You can bring in those efficiencies despite it, but if there is a higher level of digitization, it just enhances everybody's experience, and that's from start to finish, isn't it? We talk about the end-to-end journey, and that digitization just starts to clean up and make more certain and bring the confidence and trust to every part of it, of which PEXA is in the middle, if you like, in the core of that anyway.
You've touched on there a point that I think is really important to clarify really for listeners, and I don't know the answer myself. You talk about Australia using PEXA in 92% of transactions. Is this a solution that everybody has to use to benefit? I mean, let's go back to Chain Matrix and VEO. You know,
yeah.
The criticism was always that everybody had to be on it in order for everybody to benefit.
Absolutely, and I think, again, and I've been through all of those conversations for a long time, and had a lot of hope around it at the time, and then, you know, yet to be disappointed. And that is part of the reason that PEXA has been built in the UK, so that you don't have to have that network effect. You can have the benefits if you are just acting on your own. So if you're a buyer's lawyer, even in a cash purchase, buyer's lawyer cash purchase, you can still have the benefits of having that validation of title. You've still got that visibility around the money, the security aspect, and the lodging with land registry. If you've got more parties that are connecting into it, obviously, again, in the same way as you digitize more information, everybody benefits. Yes, you benefit more by other people coming in, but it doesn't mean that you, as a forward-thinking or open-minded conveyancing operation, cannot benefit in the short term and be in that position where you can see what it's all about, really, and begin to get a much more secure infrastructure across your property transactions.
I know that sort of open-minded mantra is really important to this, isn't it? Just trying to get people to think about doing things perhaps in a slightly different way. I mean, this is perhaps a tricky question, Angela, but how does PEXA fit with, for example, some of the other people we've had on the podcast, the likes of Zoopla and LMS, who have got their own networks, as you described them, albeit perhaps not payment networks directly, but have their own networks? Where does PEXA fit with National Property Transaction Network, for example, or Zoopla's proposition?
Yeah. Okay. So in relation to all of those things, I think particularly the National Property Transaction Network, they are basing that on the basis of the Property Data Trust Framework, which is the basis of the existence of the Open Property Data Association. We have all these different associations and frameworks, don't we? But of which we are another of the founder members on that. So the important thing with a lot of these things is that genuine collaboration point and people building on the basis of open standards and open frameworks, so that whatever it is at the key point in time, if it makes sense to the businesses and the ecosystems, can look to connect, because you haven't got those same barriers to entry that you would have previously. Hopefully the days of a million APIs and having to deal with all of those negotiations about how do I connect into this, that, and the other will start to fall away if we can get that data trust framework in the middle, and CFIT have just opened their coalition on this, of which all of those people that have been mentioned are members, and they're involved in it, where they can look at, okay, how can we start to glue all of this together? Is the property data trust framework that's been created by the Open Property Data Association the right communication method in here? And if it is, which it would appear to be, but we're yet to confirm, if it is, how do we then get that to a point where that is usual practice, normal practice, and anyone within the property industry should and has to adopt that? And I think then all of those barriers that we see today, I mean, there'll always be commercial pressures, of course there will, and there's always got to be the business case of, does it make sense, and is this going to be right for my individual business, whether that's PEXA or anyone else at the end of the day. But if it is, the problem is today, that doesn't necessarily mean you can easily do anything about it, because there's all these barriers to actually, all these legacy systems and ways of working that just don't facilitate for the right way. They facilitate for a way which isn't necessarily the one that you should do. But I would hope that what we're moving towards now is a situation where we can remove that and start to actually really gravitate towards a true collaboration where it makes sense, but everybody's on a similar framework, so that you can make those commercial decisions as you go.
I mean, we've managed to get as far into the discussion without even mentioning the home buying and selling consultation. So we've done pretty well so far. but it will be interesting to see whether the government have got some appetite for intervention. I mean, certainly to date, they have given every indication that they want the market to deal with it. But this consultation seems to be a sort of step into the unknown for them, and perhaps a first step into, maybe there are things that we can do that enable some of what you're talking about, that don't necessarily involve commercial discussions, but at a much higher level. Say we want to, for the sake of argument, adopt the property data trust framework. We want to adopt all those ID trust frameworks that we've developed.
Yeah, and I think there's an increasing understanding that government should and need to play a part in this to ensure that we can deliver on it. I think in relation to the consultation, what I would say is they appear to have unearthed and brought to the fore all of, or pretty much all of, the key aspects that we talk about in the property industry, whatever your view may be about that. And you know, great, let's have a debate about that. That's what's important, isn't it, to move it forward. But I think with the pilots that we are seeing via government and via different funding streams and things at the moment, there is an increasing awareness that government has a part to play and need to play a part. That may not be necessarily by legislation. It may be more looking at where things like the governance and provenance of information can be held, so that we can have a trust in that, and we can remove the possibility of that being anti-competitive and all the rest of it. So I think there, and things like the digital identity trust framework and the property data trust framework are classic examples of that. If you can house that within something like DSIT, and they can operate the accreditation process on that, and people can have confidence around that, then maybe we can then shift forward without this sort of constant feeling that something is going to stop or change. And that's part of the issue and the legacy we have, isn't it, with things like HIPS, for example, and more recently the not withdrawal of material upfront information. You know, there's this sort of, oh well, we'll drive towards legislation, we'll drive it, oh, and then it'll be removed, and
Rug comes
that,
out from under your feet.
yeah, and you know, that's there's a lot of issues around confidence there for investment for private industry. You know, you've got to be able to trust that you're not going to make a huge personal investment and then all of a sudden the wind's going to change and it's just going to be stopped in its tracks. So that's why I think quite often legislation isn't necessarily the way, but there does have to be a real responsibility within this for government, and an ongoing one, and we need to understand that. And if there are requirements and regulatory requirements for various different parts of the industry, how are they going to be actually enforced? And they need to be enforced so that people know it. You can't have this sort of jelly-like existence that doesn't really have any boundaries. You need to know what they are to be able to confidently invest and progress in an industry and feel that is the right thing to do. Otherwise there's complete uncertainty and people just don't know which way to go.
I think that's very, very fair. And we don't know what the consultation is going to say, but fingers crossed there's something tangible. We talked about that before we started recording. You know, what we hope here is that this is going to be something tangible that delivers results rather than another talking shop.
And engages. I mean, let's hope what we get out of this is a real engagement. You know, there's so much energy going into all of these various groups around the property industry at the moment, all of which have a responsibility to respond to it, but so does the industry itself. And you want that engagement so that we can actually get some tangible results at the end of it, and people feel much better about the position than they do today. And if we could get that, whatever that is, then we've got somewhere, haven't we? You just don't want, as you say, you don't want it to either rumble on, not really have any real outputs, and just feel as if you're in a similar position to how many of us have felt for many, many years, really.
Well, there's a call to action there to respond to the consultation.
Absolutely.
At the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, if you're involved in the property industry, you will have a view. You have to in this industry, otherwise you wouldn't be in it. We're pretty resilient creatures. We have to be. So, and you will have an opinion, and you need to make that known. This is an opportunity to do that. Whatever you feel, maybe the output, it's there now. It's in play, and we need to all sort of step up and do our bit really to get our voices heard.
Let's address the elephant in the room, because this is a solution that potentially does away with client account. It's a solution that you identified. You've got approval for third-party managed account access as well as part of your FCA accreditation. What is the incentive for conveyancers? Because we're at a point in time when SRA has had their client account consultation. For all intents and purposes, they appear to have kicked the can down the road with that, albeit that there may be some tweaks to it. They felt clearly that it was a bit too hot to handle.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different aspects, isn't there? Firstly, in relation to the SRA consultation, I think the weight of response and concern around that indicated that really SRA needed to do some internal works themselves before they came out, and you know, a lot of people felt very concerned about what they were indicating to the industry as a whole rather than those individuals. So there's that, and I think, but you know, it's important to note that what they have said is this isn't the end of it. They've really gone away to look at what they need to do to get their own processes in order, and they will come back. And there's an expectation for them to come back because of their overarching regulator with the LSB as well. So I think, you know, yes, it is kicking it down the road, but I don't think this is out of sight. I think this is, you know, within the foreseeable future. So you've got that. You've also got the Ministry of Justice with their gathering of evidence at the moment in relation to how they're going to fill the hole in relation to access to justice and all the rest of it. And, you know, in many other jurisdictions, including Australia, they have interest on legal trust accounts, as they call it there, is not and has never been an income stream for the law firm, and that's true of many other jurisdictions. It's not just Australia. So I think the likelihood that that's going to be seen as a viable income stream in the long term is doubtful. In relation to PEXA's part in this, okay, so this is interesting, because when PEXA originally came into the UK, the interest rate was virtually nil.
Yeah.
So, and there wasn't, you know, because of all of the experience in Australia in relation to interest, it had never really been a debate to be had from that perspective. But what it's being created as a result of the upping of interest rates in that intervening period, and how law firms have utilised that in relation to keeping them, some it's an income stream, some it's keeping themselves afloat, some, you know, and it's very tenuous, isn't it, that, because it's something that is completely outside of your control. You know, the interest rate can change at any time. Your fee rates are down to what you put them out as. And I know there are complications around that, because if you do lender work, it will depend on what the arrangements are with the lender and things like that. So I accept it's not a matter of any law firm just saying, well, I'll just charge this, and that's fine. We all know there's challenges around that. But nevertheless, it is within your gift to a certain extent, whereas an interest rate can change overnight, and has in the past, and we've seen in our industry firms disappear in the past when that happened the last time round. So I think this is part of a much larger debate, isn't it, around that sustainability piece, and using this period of time when there is changes coming in, there is this focus on it, to look at how do we change the business model that makes that a much more sustainable model, whatever happens with client account interest. And I think that's the way we need to approach this. We don't know what we can surmise, we can assume, we can, you know, make our own predictions, but we don't know what the end result is going to be about this. But I think in all likelihood, that sort of income is going to be either placed in somewhere where it's going to make money for other areas where we have no money in our society and need to supplement it, or it's going to be stopped in some way or other. So what do we do in that situation? What do we do? And I think the other thing to think about is, as it stands today, I know when I went into legal practice, there was never really, it was never about the money, and I don't mean that from a fees point of view, but it was never about holding the money. It was about, because it didn't really make any difference back in the day, you know, that it was just what you had to do to get the transaction done. It wasn't really anything above that. It's changed over the years in relation to the way people perceive money, and money in solicitors' accounts and conveyancers' accounts. The attitude to it has changed completely. It was never seen as an income earner. It was just an aside that you had to do, and actually it was a bit of a hassle. And it's still that in many ways, because we are the part of the industry that is under threat by scamming and all of those things, you know, whether that's, okay, we've got the likes of Axiomins with the misappropriation of funds, but it's just as much about that, the attack and the diversion of those funds at the moment, as it is about anything like a misappropriation. And you're in pole position for anyone to attack you for that, because this money is flowing in and out all day long, every day, and through many people within an organization who it's very difficult to keep on top of and make sure that everyone's doing that in the right way. So I think the risk, and therefore the insurability, and therefore the personal liability for the money laundering officer, for example, and all of those things, just comes to a point of, okay, is that the best thing to be doing? Doesn't that just divert the attention and the risk away from the actual legal service that you're providing? And it is, you know, conveyancing is complex in itself. If you add all of those concerns around the money on top, it just becomes an area of law where so many people have made the decision with their feet that they're getting out of it, or they're not doing it, whether that's as a law firm or whether that's as an individual. And that shouldn't be the case when it's all just to do with that risk. If we could just concentrate it back on what we're actually trying to do, move people into homes, then surely that would be a better position for most people in relation to what they're doing day to day.
Do you anticipate that actually what may well happen here is that lenders will start to drive requirement for greater control of that money? The lenders are ultimately at risk here. They are exposed. So do you anticipate that it almost might become lender driven?
Well, yes, we will see, won't we, in relation to that. But from a lender perspective, at the moment, they are incredibly exposed, and they have a complete lack of visibility of those funds. From the day that they leave them, you've got the fact that they lose their liquidity because that money is outside of their environment, so they're seen as not having it. So, you know, when they're doing all of their lending elsewhere, it's reduced, but it may not have been used, and it may have been used in the wrong way, or it may be exposed, or it may be delayed. There's many aspects that can happen. So from their perspective, to be able to see and have that visibility of where it is and when, and know that their security is protected, is pretty compelling. So but again, you know, they want to work with their law firms as well. They're incredibly important. But if there's a risk that law firm may disappear because the interest rate suddenly dips, and you know, we've seen in the press recently about some of the larger law firms with huge amounts of profit coming from interest, and in fact, if that wasn't there, they'd have been in a huge loss position. That they've got to look at the viability of those panel arrangements as well going forward, and what does that mean for them? If a firm disappears, the exposure to a lender is huge. So I think there's a lot of things in play here. It will ultimately be a lender decision what they feel is best for them and their panel, but you can see how they would feel a lot more secure in an environment where they don't lose any form of visibility on their funds at any time.
So if we've dealt with the elephant in the room to a certain extent, accepting that there are lots of spinning plates and there's lots of things up in the air as well, talk me through the PEXA charging model. I know you've got some answers to that now, and that was sort of a burning question that a lot of people have got about PEXA.
Yeah. Okay, so in relation to the way it works, firstly, there is no subscription in relation to PEXA. Okay, so it's a case-to-case basis. There's no requirement in relation to any form of integration unless you want there to be either. We have access directly into the system. So it's fully available from that perspective. You can do it on a case-to-case basis. And the way that it works is that you will have a fee for the type of activity you are doing. So if I give you an example of that. So the lender will have a fee in relation to the activity that they have in relation to dealing with us pulling the money from their reserve account and pushing it to where it needs to be. So they have a fee. From a buyer's lawyer perspective, there'll be a fee based on the fact that you're dealing with the validation of the title, the movement of the money, the registration. So it's a more involved, if you like, than the lender or the outgoing law firm. The outgoing law firm will have a fee for dealing with the balancing of the accounts and ultimately the payment out of all of their outgoing payments. So that's the way it works, and it's the same whether for any law firm. So it doesn't matter on volume. It doesn't matter on whether you're an in-house conveyancer or whether you're an external conveyancer. It's the actual activity you take in that particular workspace that dictates the fee. And in relation to the fees, we're just in the process of getting that final sign off so that we can get those. We've done a lot of activity around getting those on our website. So they will be on our website very, very shortly. So you'll be able to then interrogate those in relation to what they look like. And there's different ones if you're dealing with a remortgage or a sale or a purchase. So they'll all be completely clear. You'll be able to see that, and ultimately how that reflects against other fees that you may or may not charge today, for example, in relation to the way you telegraph monies or something of that sort. So we'd anticipate it being seen in the same way as any other fee. And we've done a lot of research around this as well with both conveyancers and consumers in relation to what the PEXA offering is and what would their expectation be around the fee. So we're really hopeful here that it will be a very reasonable fee for the level that we offer, and then ultimately that it will be really easy as well for a conveyancer to be able to show their client the value that they're bringing as a result of that as well. So that's the aim.
We are out of time, and at the end of the discussion, I'm hugely grateful for you sharing your thoughts and your insight, Angela. Thank you. Just before we finish, I know you've got a bit of a call to action. This isn't the sales pitch. This is genuinely, things are changing in the conveyancing sector, and as you say, so leaning on your own experience as well, it does feel as though we're at a point in time where conveyancers have really got to be cognizant of what's happening around their world. Otherwise, it could move past them if they're not too careful.
Absolutely. I think it's so important to be involved. It's important to keep your eyes up at some points in the day. I know that's really difficult when we're all so focused on getting the job done, but there is a lot of change. But there's also the opportunity for you to be part of that and mold how that will ultimately look like. And particularly for the likes of PEXA, we really encourage that, to try and get that real industry voice in as we are. We're at the start of the journey as well. As we continue to grow and we continue to build in all of that connectivity and all of those extra things that will happen, to have the voice of the industry within there is just so important as well. So yeah, get involved, reach out, speak to us, and find out what's going on.
Brill, thank you very much indeed for your time, Angela. That's as much as we've got time for today. The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Angela. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.